East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. During the day in the bedroom while the offender went to work, the offender would leave a bucket for her so she could use it as a toilet during the day. When Farah was rescued, the family members defended the offender and made excuses that she was being protected and looked after her because she had run away from home due to family. When Farah was rescued, she was covered in bruises, blood stains, cigarette burns and intoxicated on drugs, and suffering from severe abdominal pains as a result of multiple rapes. After being rescued, Farah started self-harming as she relived the ordeal of her rapes. For her own safety, she had to be taken into medical care for psychiatric help to deal with her trauma. The police were informed, but there was no prosecution because Farah was not willing to give evidence and formally report her abusers. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Saima's story. Saima, of Pakistani heritage, came from a violent family. Her brothers and father were very violent. She grew up not liking herself and secretly self-harmed. At the age of 15, Saima became sexually active out of choice. She had sexual relationships with boys her own age and a bit older and became known as a slag at school by other pupils. One day Saima went to a local park with some boys and other girls and was raped by 3 men. They also filmed her ordeal. Saima struggled to come to terms with this and started to drink heavily. No one believed anything Saima said, including what had happened to her, because she was seen as a troublemaker at school. The men that had abused her started to offer her money, drugs and alcohol. Eventually she started to view them as her friends. However, she was regularly raped and beaten by them and then would also suffer more violence at home. The offenders, who were all of Pakistani background, would encourage each other to rape and abuse her. Saima did not seek help as she felt this was her destiny, and was also extremely scared of her abusers. She believed they were so dangerous that they would kill her and her family. Saima struggles now with serious sexually transmitted diseases, health implications and addictions. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Iman's story. Iman, who was from a Muslim background, ethnicity not disclosed, was in her late teens when she first reached out to talk about the sexual abuse she had suffered from a young age after years of being groomed by her Quran teacher, her father and the women in their respective families. She had sustained years of not only sexual and physical abuse but also psychological brainwashing. Iman had always believed her teacher to be right because he used verses from the Quran, which he claimed justified his abuse of her and the abuse by her father. Her father stopped sexually abusing when she reached puberty. However, her Quran teacher continued the abuse. His wife was aware of the abuse and even counseled Iman to continue allowing it to happen when she began to object to it. Iman came across information online, which made her question what the religious teacher had been telling her. She realized that the abuse could not be justified using the Quran. However, she struggled to let go of the belief she had been taught because throughout her childhood it was her norm that was even validated by her mother. It has taken a number of years to help Iman understand what she had suffered. Iman eventually disclosed that other men and girls were also involved in this circle of abuse. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Aisha's story. When Aisha, who was from a Muslim background, ethnicity not disclosed, was 6 years old, she was sexually abused by a family member. As Aisha was very young, she didn't understand what had happened to her until she became a teenager and became aware of sex. Aisha had not spoken to anyone about what she had suffered and went into deep depression. She took to self-harming as a way to cope and isolated herself from her family. When Aisha was 14 years old, she became mixed up with the wrong crowd at school. She was frequently in trouble with her teachers for displaying disruptive and aggressive behavior. Her new friends introduced her to an online Islamic forum, where young Muslims could chat regularly, hang out and pick each other up because their parents did not allow them to date or go out after school. After a few months on 2 Islamic online forums, Aisha found herself regularly chatting into the night with other male forum users. These users were adult men. She felt chatting into the night was a good distraction for her and that she could find solace from the nightmares she often had. What Aisha did not know at the time was that she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the sexual abuse she suffered when she was a child. Gradually the men online groomed Aisha, under the guise of friendship. One man used his status of having an established presence on the forum to build trust with Aisha, often using Islam as a pretext for gaining this trust and confidence in him. Before she knew what was happening, she was pulled into sexually explicit conversations online and was coerced to perform sexual acts through the web camera on her computer. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Safa's story. Safa, who is of Muslim background, ethnicity not disclosed, was just 9 years old when a family friend, whom she called uncle, started to pay her lots of attention. He told her she was special and that they had a unique friendship. The uncle, who was in his 40s, married with 2 children, began to touch her sexually. Despite this, she remembers that she loved him because he always bought her treats or was there to comfort her if she had an argument with her parents. When Safa was 14 years old, the uncle raped her in her family home while her parents were out. He told her that if she told anyone, she would not be believed and would be called a slag. He also told her that her parents loved him more than her, and that who would believe a young girl over a married and respected man. Safa felt very confused. On the one hand, she thought her uncle loved her and this was his way of showing his love, but on the other hand, he was mean and cruel when he threatened her to remain silent. Safa had no one to turn to and her behavior quickly deteriorated. She began taking drugs, sleeping around with boys at school and doing badly in her school work. She became known as a troublemaker at home, school and in her community. Her uncle took advantage of this and stepped up his advances, began showing her off to his friends so they could approach her for sex too. They were all abusing her and sometimes were violent if she didn't comply with their demands. When Safa was about 16 years old, she disclosed the sexual abuse to a helpline who contacted statutory agencies and the police. However, the case did not progress further because Safa's parents did not believe her and she felt she could not go against her uncle whom she sometimes felt she still loved. At age of 17, Safa was addicted to heroin, lived on the streets and often prostituted herself to earn some money. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Nazia's story. A Bangladeshi family of 4 sisters lost their father at a very young age. They lived with their mother who was unemployed and could not speak English. Nazia was the eldest and when she was 14 years old, she met a Bangladeshi man outside school and started dating him and became sexually active with him. Within a few months her boyfriend had got her hooked on heroin. To fund the drug habits, he then forced her to start doing street work. He also circulated her amongst his friends who were mostly in their 20s but a few were teenagers. Most of them were of South Asian background with a few being white. The men would use her for sex in exchange for money or drugs. Nazia felt helpless as she was totally at the mercy of her addiction. The men were aware of this and used it to their advantage. She was made to do everything, including role play, which she found very disturbing. It wasn't long before Nazia's boyfriend introduced her younger sisters to his friends. They too found themselves in the same situation as their older sister, becoming addicted to drugs and being passed around by their boyfriends to their friends. Due to their Muslim faith, they felt unable to ask for help. They thought that they would be judged and blamed. For this reason they did not seek help for a long time. The sisters managed to conceal their double lives from their mother when questioned on their whereabouts by covering for each other. Nazia and her sister's ordeal only emerged when she had a health scare and visited her local GP, who referred her to an agency for her drug addiction. The support worker helped Nazia and the rest of the family and involved other mainstream agencies. Collectively they provided them with the necessary support to deal with the addictions and helped them to relocate to a different city. The girls felt that moving away was the only way to escape their past and move forward with their lives. When they moved, they continued with their rehabilitation. Nazia and her sisters were not willing to report the men that sexually exploited them. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Fawz's story. Fawzia is a Pakistani girl. When she was 14 years old, she started to receive a lot of attention from the older 17-year-old Pakistani boys in her school. She felt that she was getting attention because she was quite heavy-chested compared with the other pupils. They bought her lots of gifts and started to ask her to meet them alone without her friends. They started to meet her alone in a nearby alleyway. Eventually they persuaded her to perform sexual acts. The boys then circulated information around the school about what she had done with them, which resulted in her getting a bad reputation. She became isolated in school and the boys pretended they were her only friends so they could continue exploiting her. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, child sexual exploitation. Sumaira's story. Sumaira's early years were highly traumatizing for her. Her mother died when she was a toddler and was brought up by her Pakistani father and grandmother. She was diagnosed with learning difficulties at a young age, and her father began sexually abusing her when she was 13 years old. Her uncle and her older brother also started to abusing her soon after. All of them were very educated, working in various professions, and were aware of each other's abuse of Sumaira. Her father, uncle and brother continued to abuse her for the next 4 years. Sumaira did not understand what was happening to her and believed that these men loved her. Her grandmother was aware of the abuse and rape but did not intervene. She had even walked into the room when Sumaira was being raped by her father. She told Sumaira not to tell anyone what was taking place because it would bring shame on the family. When Sumaira was 17 years old, she started attending college and a key worker was assigned to her because of her learning difficulties. The key worker noticed regular bruising on her wrists and arms as if she had been forcefully held. After conversations with Sumaira, the worker suspected abuse and involved social services. After several meetings, Sumaira eventually had the confidence to disclose her experiences. However, she refused to either report the abuse to the police or leave home because she believed that her father, uncle and brother loved her. However, one day Sumaira decided she could no longer endure the abuse when all 3 of them raped her together. Although she was still not willing to report them, she asked social services to find her accommodation and was placed in a women's refuge. Within a few months of moving into the refuge, a young Pakistani man befriended Sumaira. She started dating him because he promised to marry her. As soon as she started a relationship with him, he took her to a house party and introduced her to his friends. During the party, he told her that he owed lots of money to his friends and that if she really loved him, she would help him pay off his debts by having sex with the men. She was confused and felt pressurized and reluctantly agreed. She was taken to the bedroom and several friends had sex with her. The boyfriend continued to pass Sumaira around to his friends and other men for the next 6 months. Sumaira confided in her social worker about what was happening but again refused to report the abuse to the police because she believed her boyfriend loved her. Eventually, after support from the social worker, Sumaira started to stand up to her boyfriend and refused to go out with him. However, the boyfriend then befriended another vulnerable young woman at the refuge. So when Sumaira would leave the refuge to go anywhere, the other young woman called the boyfriend to inform him. The boyfriend and his friends would drive around looking for her and would pick her up off the street and gang rape her in the back of a van. They would also torture her and insert objects into her vagina such as perfume bottles and leads. The social services informed the police, but Sumaira would still not report the rapes to the police, as she now feared the men. Her social worker then arranged for Sumaira to be moved to another part of the country. It was the only way to end the cycle of abuse. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Jamila's story. Jamila was a graduate in her mid-20s from a Pakistani background. She was living alone, away from family because of her job. A local Pakistani man, a few years older than her, befriended her. He told her that he loved her and wanted to marry her, but in secret until he could get his parents to formally agree to the marriage. Unknown to Jamila at the time, he was married with children. They married in secret without involving either family. Jamila would receive visits in the evening from her husband so he could have sex with her and then return back to his family home. He then started demanding expensive gifts from her, such as designer watches, clothes and shoes. Jamila loved her husband, so she bought him whatever he asked for. She was unable to keep up with his demands and could not afford to buy him the requested items. It was then that her husband suggested that she started earning additional income, so she could continue buying him what he wanted and to help pay off his debts. He put a lot of pressure on Jamila and used emotional blackmail to get her to have sex with other men in exchange for money. He then started taking Jamila to various houses so his friends could have sex with her. Some of these men looked religious from their appearance, such as having beards and wearing thabis. Jamila was not the only one being exploited in this way. The same network of Pakistani men would exchange information about other young Asian women and converts living by themselves in the same town and target them in the same way. They would then share their so-called wives within the network. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Anisa's story. Older Pakistani men befriended Anisa, a 14-year-old Pakistani girl. However, when she started trusting them, the men forced her into prostitution. Anisa would not be able to move due to the amounts of alcohol and drugs they would give. Many of the men that were having sex with Anisa appeared religious because of their thabis, Islamic clothing, and beards. They were from a Pakistani background. This made her lose her faith in Islam and she could not even bring herself to enter a mosque or cover her head. She was prostituted for another 2 years. When Anisa was 16 years old, she gained enough courage to ask for help. She believes that she was only able to escape her situation because she was placed in a women's refuge. Anisa is now trying to take tiny steps and starting a new life with her child. She is also reclaiming her faith in life and Islam, realizing that Islam was not to blame but people were. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation.